What is up, guys? Dr. Drunk, aka here, and we're doing a quick review of the World of Warships Soviet Squadron bundle here. Now, if we take a look at the actual bundle itself, you can take a look at what is offered. You get the Ochakov, the Pyotr Bagration, you get the Mikoyan, and you get a bunch of other additional things. You get 6,000 balloons, 15 million credits, 200 each of the economic signals, including the Equal Speed London Charlie, India Bravo, Terra 3, Zulu, Papa Papa, and Zulu Hotel. On top of this, you actually get 3 10-point Russian commanders. You get 3 port slots. You get 3 Soviet permanent camouflages for the respective ships. And, of course, you do get the commemorative flags that go with each specific ship, along with a combat bonus mission of 3 times XP for the first 25 games in each one of these ships. But what is the real reason most people would want to pick up this package? Well, if you're listening to this as it releases, this is releasing sometime around the early half, I guess, of the Soviet cruiser patch. This is patch 9.4, and this is the early access to the Soviet heavy cruiser line. And of course, because it's early access to a cruiser line, you have, if it ever loads up, an armory package where you can spend Soviet tokens on a variety of gadgets, including the Tier 8 tech tree ship and the Tier 9 tech tree ship and permanent camos that go along with all of those. The nice thing about these ships is these ships offer between 15 and 30 tokens. These are Soviet tokens per win in the ship, especially if you're trying to grind these tech tree ships. That's a real benefit considering the random number generated variety of these token drops. But what do you really get out of that package? Well, if you look at the package is about $194. If you figure out the cost of the Ochakov, the cost of the Pyotr Bagration, the 6,000 doubloons, the 15 million credits, 200 flags of each of those 5 flags, and the Mikoyan, you figure, is worth 4,000 doubloons once you actually unlock her via tokens. In reality, you're getting 3 commanders, 3 port slots, 3 permanent camos, 2 of them are Tier 8, by the way, 3 commemorative flags, and 3 combat XP missions, plus the token earning potential for a total of about $2. Yeah, we did the math. We actually did the math on stream, and we did all of this on stream, actually. You can check that out at Twitch TV, twitch.tv/DrDrunkAKA, where we play all the games that you're going to see, and we went through all of the mathematics involved in this as we were playing them. But let's get onto the ships and see, are these ships anything that you are even interested in picking up? We will start with the Tier 5 Mikoyan, and I have to be perfectly honest, this ship is trash. There's a reason this is the 300 token freemium ship, because this ship is utter garbage. Complete and utter garbage. If we click on armor layout, you will see the front end is 13 millimeters, so it's pretty much overmatched by everything at its tier or above. And this is Tier 5, remember, so you will see Tier 7 matchmaking. It has a 16 millimeter casemate plating and only a 35 millimeter Citadel armor belt, which means this thing is squishy. This thing will eat penetrations for days. It will eat Citadels for days from all kinds of angles. Look at this athwartship Citadel plate of only 35 millimeters. Anything that comes in at an angle that overmatches that bow will just plunge right through that Citadel, and yeah, you're pretty well screwed. So armor is definitely not this thing's strong suit. If you look at the back, it has this weird Citadel deck like jutting out in the back here, which is any shells that are coming in from behind can land right on top of that deck, easily overmatch that little tiny 50 millimeter piece, and you're screwed again. So it's made out of wet tissue paper. Well, it also has very few hit points. This ship has 21,000 hit points, and because it eats citadels and pens for days, this thing has very, very little going for it. One good broadside salvo from any battleship with decent aim, and you're going back to port rather quickly. This can be countered slightly, and I'll get into that in a minute. But the crowning glory of what the Russian cruiser line is supposed to be are supposed to be the guns. And these are not really much of an exception in terms of their caliber. They are 3x2, 180 millimeter. So they're big guns for Tier 5. That's about where the good things stop when it comes to this ship. The reload time is extremely long at 13.2 seconds. I believe it's approximately 2.5 seconds longer than the Kirov, which is the Tier 5 ship that you're all familiar with. 22.5 second, 180 degree turn time means the guns are extremely slow. The dispersion is passable. The HE shell damage is okay for its tier at 2,500 base alpha damage. The fire chance is passable at 12%, 30 millimeters of armor shell penetration. With the HE is pretty good for a 180 millimeter rifle. The AP shells hit very, very hard, 45-50 for an alpha strike, which is actually extremely good. The velocities are okay. The maximum range is 16.2 kilometers. However, in practice, this ship suffers from Russian cruiser dispersion characteristics, whereby the dispersion ellipse actually increases as distance increases, which means this ship is not as effective at the end of its range where it needs to be in order to survive. It does have torpedoes. It has 2x3, 4 kilometer range torps. These are YOLO torps, 64 knot speed, and hits for 14.4 apiece. They're nothing to write home about. They're your typical Russian self-defense torpedoes. The AA defense, well, we all know that AA doesn't work in this meta, so who cares? She's speedy at 35.5 knots, has a massive 830 meter turning circle with a 5.9 second rudder shift time. And concealment without a captain is 11.6 kilometers with a 6.4 kilometer air detection range. Now, I did mention that you can kind of work around that hit point pool. One of the things that I recommend doing in order to work around that hit point pool, if you have him, is to place Alexander Ovechkin onto this ship. And this is the captain build that I'm working with at the moment. This ship actually synergizes very well with the Tier 8, the Ochakov, but priority target, adrenaline rush, survivability expert on a light cruiser. You'll see why when we get to the Ochakov. Superintendent, again, this is more for the Ochakov build, which you're going to play much more. And concealment expert, that is going to be your first 13. After that, you have options in terms of what you wish to do. If you wish to go for demolition expert, is probably not the worst idea out there. That will take you to your 16th point, and then you'll have the ability to either run basics, or you could potentially run jack of all trades and preventative maintenance, because on this and the Ochakov, the turrets do not seem to like to survive. It's worth noting that as well. But this is a basic captain build, 13-point captain build that should work fairly well for you. The camo looks really, really nice. I will give it that. The graphics people have done a fantastic job. It's a standard consumable camo, or standard permanent camo, 50% XP and minus 10% post-battle service cost. So you can actually earn some credits on this ship. And as you can see with Ovechkin's buffed survivability expert, you go from 21,000 to 23,000 hit points. It's not a big help, but it is some variety of help. So let's take this ship into battle and let's see how she performs. All right, and the first of 2 games I've got here for you in the Mikoyan. We joined this one. This one's a bottom tier game. This is a tier 7 battle. And this game is not terribly impressive in terms of damage output, but it does give you an idea of the positioning that you'll need to be taking with a ship like this. And sadly, how utterly fragile this ship really is. We are kiting towards the east side of the map, towards the 910 line, and our Farragut wants to kill himself. He tries to gunfight a York one-on-one, help him out as much as possible. But you will see in a lot of cases, in this game particularly, how poor these shells really are in terms of their effectiveness. The Mikoyan shells, despite being 180 millimeter shells, have just, they seem to shatter on everything. And I don't know if this is a case of the shells just, I'm unlucky and I've had poor RNG and they've hit things like turrets and barbettes and things like that that normal HE would absolutely shatter on as well. Or if it's just the characteristics. And you can see in that salvo, one of those shells, one of those turrets shot incredibly wide. And you'll see that a number of times in this particular replay. The accuracy of the Mikoyan's 3x2, or 2x3, excuse me, 3x2, excuse me, setup is questionable at best. The few times that you do get excellent dispersion are the times that you don't look at. I mean, that dispersion's a perfect example. That one right shell, I don't know where it went. But the times that you get good dispersion, you get trolled on shatters and fire chance, and it's questionable at best, I would say. And I'm not entirely sure. I haven't played the Talon as of the time that this is released. I have not played the Talon. I have not played the Riga. Again, 3 shells in a grouping and 2 shells in the middle of nowhere. Or 1 shell in the middle of nowhere is, again, questionable dispersion, but who cares? We're at 15 kilometers. That dispersion is just unbelievable. You will quickly see the problem with attempting to play the Mikoyan at a range where it's safe to play the Mikoyan. This is a ship that has to be able to kite and maneuver. Anything that has even remotely fast shells, if you get close enough for the guns to be viable, and there you go, 1 shell lands short, the other 5 land long. York shells are not incredibly fast, but he's right on target with me. If you're at a range where the guns are even remotely reliable, you risk being deleted, which you will see later on in this actual replay, let alone the piece that follows. But Mikoyan has really nothing going for it. This ship has nothing except a bit of speed. Right now, it seems like people are used to shooting at fast cruisers. I mean, York, that's a relatively good dodge for the York shells. But people are used to shooting these faster cruisers. They're no longer surprised by the speed of these cruisers or cruisers like them. So your main advantage, which is your speed and your range, the two do not necessarily work together. You really have to think about your engagement ranges. You cannot simply, and again, this guy's at what, 13 and a half kilometers away. That's a relatively, I would consider that an okay salvo. Even though it only does 800 damage. You struggle to do damage in this ship, by the way. Against battleships, which are your preferred food, because of their reload timing and the fact that you can dodge their shells more reliably, you will not get much damage. Now, there again, there's a fire. That Iron Duke was burning. He used his damage control. There's 3 shatters on the midships portion of the Iron Duke. You know, all we're trying to do here is we're trying to set a fire. We're trying to see if we can get him to burn. And there you go. Dispersion looks good. 2 shatters. This cruiser may actually be a ship that benefits from IFHE at tier 5. As odd as that sounds, a dispersion at 12.5k, 1 hit out of 6 shells. You should expect to not hit much more than that, to be perfectly honest. I'm not... There's... Finally, we get a fire on the Bayern. But I'm not entirely sure... I don't know if there's a miscalculation or an error in the coding for this, but... Again, now we're aiming for the rear of the ship to try and get the rear of the ship on fire, and we get 1 hit. He's turning broadside. Hopefully we should be able to get shells landed on this and do some damage with that. We get... It's probably our best salvo that we're going to see is 4 shells. He's going to die to Sharni torpedoes. And the Iron Duke will kill the Scharnhorst, which is going to make us public enemy number 1 at 11.5 kilometers. Now pay quick attention to this. At 11.5 kilometers, one would think this ship will function and work extremely well at 11.5k. We get 3 hits out of 6 shells, where it looks like all of those shells were about to hit. 3 of them sailed wide. We've closed to 9.5 kilometers. And again, 3 hits, 2 of them are shatters. No fires. In fact, we have 2 out of 44 hits are fires, which is really poor, very, very poor RNG. We finally get close enough. We get a bunch of shatters and 1 hit and a fire. And this will demonstrate, even angled, how poorly armored this ship is, as he punches right through the nose and citadels through the nose. We're dumping a set of torpedoes, assuming he's going to continue pushing in. Those are slow torps. All we can do is hope to kill him. Again, shatter, shatter, shatter. And shatter, 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 and pen for no damage. This thing's guns are weak, guys. These are weak. Moving on to our next clip. We're going to see... This is actually probably my best game in this ship. I actually may have had one higher damage game that essentially involved me sitting behind an island and doing nothing except plinking away for the entire match. This also has a CV in it, which shows how utterly ineffective this ship's AA is at defending itself. I have 3 to 4 other ships in my AA aura right now, and I managed to shoot down a plane. 1 plane. We're going to see in a moment here, again, we are bottom tier. This is a tier 6 game, but we're going to see in a moment here just how badly this cruiser trades compared to something, well, like an Alba. Alba's not known to be an overly overpowered ship. Her guns do hit pretty hard, but surely something that 180s should be able to handle, especially with her weak armor, and we can see exactly how hard those shells really do hit. We lose about 4k in 1 salvo. That's almost, what, 18%, almost 20% of our hit points. We're trying the AP on a nose of an Alba. We should be able to pen that easily. We get a pen and a ricochet. Now the Alba is going to turn broadside, which is perfect for this 180 millimeter AP. However, we get 3 hits and they're all 3 overpens. Not even allowed to get pens on that, which is funny as it is. We take another chunk of damage, and finally we get some overpens, some pens, and we finish off that Alba. But you're going to see this game kind of quickly get out of hand. And to be honest, out of the maybe dozen games I've played about this ship, this was about the only game that I played I was able to really put torpedoes to any meaningful use. This ship is bad, guys. This ship is just bad. There's no two ways about it. This ship is just really, really bad. Shooting at DDs, you would think it has a high muzzle velocity. The shells have a relatively flat arc. With dispersion like that, you're not you're not going to hit him anyway. And granted, this destroyer player was actually relatively good at shucking and jiving and dodging. Apparently, stopping at smoke is no longer a thing either. I don't know when I missed that memo, but that seems to be a new meta piece right now. Destroyers that don't stop and smoke. And that is partly my bad aim, assuming that, you know, a DD lays smoke. A DD may want to stop in said smoke and go undetected, but I digress. That's something completely different that, well, yeah. We'll figure that out in a different video. That's something completely different. There's a good look at the longer range dispersion, the end of range dispersion. You're not hitting anything with this ship beyond 12 kilometers. For example, those all splashed around the New York. We have two DDs in cap. It's pretty easy to tell based on the minimap. The Fujin, utterly potatoes, decides that he wants to engage in a gunfight with a Westeros while there's a Hatsuharu on his broadside. And while I appreciate the resets, he would have been so much more valuable. Just staying alive and spotting. Now he chooses to smoke up too little too late. The Westeros goes dark, and we're going to attempt to push in and potentially try to save this cap. Spoiler alert, we do not save this cap. We don't save this game. But it does kind of show where the Mikoyan may have a niche, possibly pushing things like destroyers. I mean, it's not good at pushing light cruisers. It's not good at pushing battleships. As you saw in the previous video, how the Iron Duke managed to chunk half my health with one salvo. Front guns are out on the Westeros. We do not get a single hit. Guys, get used to it. That's what the Mikoyan is. The accuracy is bad. The armor's bad. It's not a good ship, folks. It's not a good ship. There's a reason it's a free ship. About all it was good for was getting the token missions and getting the doubloons when you unlock it for the actual tokens. Aside from that, there's not a lot to love about this ship. At all. DD is spotted, about 7k away. All 6 guns away on it. We get one hit. One hit at 7 kilometers. Shells out again on the Westeros. Again, one hit from 7 kilometers. And the damage we're doing is minimal, to say the least. Here you'll see probably the best thing about this ship is the maneuverability. Thankfully, we get one hit that ends in a kill there. But slam on the brakes, hit the rudder, wide to starboard, and suddenly you can actually do some torpedo beating here, which is not necessarily a bad thing. 7.5 kilometers, all of our guns, not a single hit. And now you're going to see, well, we have a Dunkirk in front of us. We're dead. There's no getting out of this. The only thing we can really do here is go for a YOLO torpedo. Finally, at 5K, we managed to get more than one hit. The Dunkirk actually aims too high and just basically superstructure pens me, but you're going to see just what battleship guns can do. Again, the angle here you're going to see is around 20 degrees, and that's a Citadel right through the belt, right through the side belt. In that case, he aims too high, goes through the casemate. The torpedoes are away. About all you can do here, and my only hope was to kind of just punch into this island and hope that the torps would flood him out. We get a pair of torpedo hits, and yeah, he's got to repair up, of course, so he's not going to flood out. Not from our flood. And the CV will come in and kill us. But the bottom line here, folks, this ship sucks. This thing is garbage. So let's move on to its bigger brother, the Ochakov. Okay, guys, moving on from perhaps the biggest dumpster I've ever seen at Tier 5. In fact, one of the biggest dumpsters I've ever seen at Tier 5. We're going to move on to the Tier 8 Ochakov. Again, a Soviet light cruiser design. We'll look at the armor. If we hit the armor tab, you can see, actually, if I turn on front end, you can see she's 25 millimeter fore end plating, 25 millimeter aft end plating, so significant buff in terms of survivability. This puts her on par with ships like the Mainz, which, as you know, is actually a very, very effective ship. She does have a 27 millimeter deck, and she has 25 millimeter upper belt or casemate armor. She also comes with a 70 millimeter Citadel armor belt, which is actually very similar to her up-tiered big sister, the Smolensk. Very, very similar profile on this ship. Very, very thin, very long, 70 millimeter belt. Her Citadel athwart ship is 100 millimeter and 100 millimeter on the athwart ship bulkhead. So her Citadel protection is actually fairly substantial in terms of a light cruiser. If we remove her deck armor, her Citadel roof is a 50 millimeter roof. And it's a little bit tough to see because of this actual camo scheme, but it is a nice big flat Citadel deck roof right there. So she's actually relatively well protected. If you're at all familiar with the Mainz, you'll be very familiar with how to angle in this ship in order to prevent issues in terms of citadels and things like that. She's a wiggler. Again, she has a relatively small hit point pool. In fact, she has a very small hit point pool. 30,200 hit points for a Tier 8 light cruiser. 30,200. Now, her original old school brethren, the Kuchazov, is 40,700. Even the Mainz, 42,500 hit points. So this ship is actually relatively squishy. 39,400 hit points for the Albemarle. So this ship is actually very, very, very lacking in terms of hit points. And again, this is a point of order where the commander can actually have something to do with this. The gimmick of this ship is that she is not 180 millimeter guns. She is 4x2 152 millimeter rifles. They have a 6.1 second reload time. So approximately every 6 seconds, you can put out a broadside of 8 shells with a 2200 HE alpha and a 3300 AP alpha. So these are relatively light shells. They do have 30 millimeters of armor penetrating capacity, so they follow the 1/5 rule. This is at Tier 8. IFHE is effective at Tier 8 for a light cruiser, 152 millimeter guns if you choose to take it. But you do risk losing that nifty 12.5% fire chance. The turrets turn quickly, 13.8 seconds. The dispersion is fairly tight at 131 meters. And it does have a range of approximately 15.6 meters with relatively good 950 meters per second shell velocity. The problem with these light shells is they seem to lose impetus over range. And what I mean by that is they tend to lose their speed fairly quickly and fall. I'm not going to say unpredictably, but they can be a bit of a challenge to get used to. These are not your 155 millimeter, or are they 152s? It's not your 152 millimeter Kuchazov shells. They feel significantly different. They feel significantly different. And I've played enough Kuchazov to say that these feel very different. Torpedo-wise, and again, she does suffer from the Russian cruiser characteristics of increasing ellipse as distance increases. However, the distance is not that significant on this ship, and the dispersion is fairly good, to be perfectly honest, 131 meters. So you don't notice it nearly as much on this ship as you do, for example, on the longer range offerings like the Mikoyan or the Bagration. She does come equipped with 2x5, quintuple. I can read. 2 quintuple torpedo launchers with an 8-kilometer range. They hit relatively hard, 15,100 points damage. They're pretty slow, though, at 56 knots, but that 8-kilometer range makes them valuable in terms of kiting. So they're a little bit more than a self-defense torpedo. Again, AA range, big fucking deal. Nobody cares. Maneuverability, she's quick, 36.8 knots with a speed flag, 750-meter turning circle, which is actually relatively good for a Russian light cruiser, with a 6.6 rudder shift time. So she's a wiggler. And that rudder shift time does come with this steering gears 1 modification installed. That's exactly how I build this ship. Notice I didn't say anything about building the Mikoyan because nobody gives a shit about building the Mikoyan. That thing is a piece of garbage. Without a commander on here, it's a 10.1 kilometer detection range. And as I had mentioned, we tend to want to run Alexander Ovechkin with his survivability expert perk. Same build as with the Mikoyan. However, now his concealment is 9.1 on the ship, and survivability goes up to 33,400 hit points, which matters in this case because of her consumable loadout. That could be the difference between bringing your consumables to bear and not. Now you're going to see main armaments mod 1, surveillance radar modification 1. You'll know why. But if you don't have this, I would actually go with engine room protection because this is a wiggly kiting ship. You're going to look at aiming systems mod 1, steering gears mod 1 versus prop mod 1. If you like to sit behind islands, you can. If you're a big boy and daring and you want to try and open water gunboat with it and wiggle, then you can take steering gears, but you can take prop mod. And, of course, always concealment system 1. The gimmick behind the Mikoyan, the Ochakov, is her consumable loadout. She gets defensive fire by default. She gets a 10-kilometer, 20-second base surveillance radar, 24 seconds with the mod, and she gets 3.5 and 5-kilometer hydro with a 100-second action time. So she has a very neat bag of tricks that she can utilize and become very, very useful, especially late game. She does lack the DPM to be a true destroyer hunter, at least in the early game, but if you can avoid getting blapped quickly, you can do some pretty solid damage with this ship. So, obviously, she comes with a permanent camo, offers standard bonuses, -3 detection, +4% dispersion, -10% to post-battle cost, and +50% XP earned per battle. And she's actually a fairly good Soviet captain trainer for this respect. She does have a bit of a high skill floor, but what we will do is we'll take her out and I will show you how she tends to work. All right. This game is, as you can see, it's a tier 8 game. There's a CV in play. We're actually on 2 brothers, but we're not going to go down the middle. Somebody else may do that. Hint, hint. But what you're going to see here, you're going to see some basic Russian light cruiser gameplay as basically identified by the Ochakov, and this ship is so much better. It's 3 tiers higher, but it is just such a better ship with such better intangibles and tangibles. The 2x4 guns, even though they are 152s, they fire significantly quicker. They seem to hit harder overall. You'll see a couple of AP salvos out here. And again, we're shooting at an Albemarle. We're not shooting at a battleship with AP, but 3,000 hit points plus, and that salvo. This salvo going out there, another 1,600. I mean, the AP is just so much more consistent on this ship. The HE, look at the dispersion on this compared to the Mikoyan. I mean, the dispersion is just so much better. The fire chance, while only 1% or 2 higher, is actually so much better. Anyway, the shell arcs are much more reasonable. They're much more comfortable if you've played any kind of Russian cruisers, especially the Russian light cruisers like the Chapayev or the Shores. You're going to feel much more at home in the Ochakov. You're going to feel much more at home in the Ochakov. 2,800 points damage on that Albemarle with that salvo, 2,400 on that one. Unfortunately, the Albemarle's return fire takes out our engine, and we have to rep that. But you'll basically notice that we found ourselves a nice cozy island, and we're able to sit and do some damage. That was some questionable dispersion with only 1 shell hit out of 8. But again, you know, those salvos where the shells do not go where you aim are significantly fewer and far between compared to the Mikoyan. You know, the Mikoyan is a much worse package. I mean, again, this ship doesn't have a lot of armor, but it has a lot more armor than the Mikoyan, and it's going to see bigger guns than the Mikoyan. But either way, this is a much better package, which is most people are going to feel much more comfortable in. One thing it does not do well is AA. If you look at the fact that is a Ryujo. I'm sorry, that's not a Ryujo, that's a Ranger. You look at the fact that that's a Ranger that just struck me. That's a tier 6 CV with tier 6 planes. It just struck a tier 8 light cruiser. And granted, we did not use the defensive AA consumable. We want to see if the AA is actually functional, but this is CV 2020, ha ha ha, and AA is completely useless. We have a Colorado out on the flank. We're going to take a look at him, but we have 2 ships pushing our mid. And the thing you'll see here, just from that shot, and you'll see another salvo from that Colorado later on, which illustrates just how maneuverable this ship is. The Ochakov is actually a very nimble platform for a Russian light cruiser. Any Russian cruiser, most people think, handles basically like a barge. The Ochakov actually is relatively nimble for a cruiser. It's somewhat easier to dodge shells in than you would think, and it really performs well. And it's worth noting, at this point, we've done, 37,500 points of damage, basically to 1 target. We sat there and basically gave it to that Albemarle. And this ship is built much more for DPM than the Mikoyan. It's built for survival much more than the Mikoyan. And it has a suite of consumables, which in this case are not really used. I'll be honest with you, this battle does not showcase the Ochakov's consumables. Now, this is a potato moment on my part. I'm thinking, well, the Leander's turning around to get his other side torps off. The Farragut's going to get his torps off, and he's going to go get into that smoke, and he's going to hide in that smoke. That's my 200 IQ play. If I'm the Farragut, that's what I'm trying to do. This Farragut is only working on about 50 IQ and has to turn around and get his opposite side torpedoes away. And I'm looking, going, ah, shit, I'm about to go pink. But thankfully, that Dallas saves me, and thank you very much, CV. I really appreciated that. The Dallas saves me from going pink. It's like cheeky, tell the CV to piss off. And I'm going to start working on the Dallas here. Spoiler alert, I'm not going to get a chance to work on the Dallas because he's about to get obliterated as he turns semi-broadside, but he shows enough to the North Carolina that it doesn't really matter. We're at about 47,000 points of damage, and now we're going to go do light cruiser things. Light cruiser things include sending out for coffee and donuts, potentially changing the water bottle, and raining HE fire on people from long range. Now, the Ochakov does have that nice, nifty consumable set of hydro, radar, and defensive AA. The radar is budget variety. It is only 10 kilometer. It is not 12 kilometer. With the mod, it only lasts 24 seconds. It's something to remember. You're really not that big of a destroyer hunter. However, at this point in the game, you more than certainly could go out onto a flank and hunt down a DD. You will see the one problem with those Russian 152s. Here, you will see shatters all over the deck of a battleship. That is not uncommon for a non-IFHE light cruiser. Again, this has 152s. IFHE would be entirely appropriate in this case if you want to spec it and lose the fire chance. To be perfectly honest, once this event is over, I won't be playing the Mikoyan again. I would probably spec this for IFHE and be done with it. We're going to pick on a Colorado. Colorado, loaded with superstructure. Look at that big, bulky superstructure. We can start chunking him for decent damage. 2,800 points of damage there. That one's 4,300 points of damage. We set a fire. Colorado is having a fun time. And you can see this 6.1 second reload is nothing to sneeze at. Even though it only has 8 barrels, 6.1 second reload actually makes up for that to some extent. We're sailing more or less broadside. We are turned slightly away, and we are reducing our speed to about a quarter. And you're about to see what the Ochakov can actually do in terms of dodging. She's a nimble girl, that's for damn sure. We're going to see it. There's the muzzle flash from the Colorado. We peg the throttle, and we turn away. And all of those shells are going to splash safely behind us. As the Colorado misses, our fires continue to burn, and in just a moment here, we're going to get our favorite ribbon, the destroyed ribbon. The rest of the game pretty much is doing light cruiser things again, but it's a perfect example. The Ochakov is actually a really, really good ship. A high skill floor. She's very, very fragile, as you can see, just from the damage that I took. She is extremely fragile, but she does have fantastic damage dealing and utility potential. That being said, let's move on to her big sister, the Tier 8 Soviet light/heavy cruiser, the Pyotr Bagration. All right, and third up out of the Admiral pack, we have the Pyotr Bagration. Pyotr Bagration is actually, or P-Bag, the PB, the peanut butter and jelly, the P, the B, whatever you want to call it. This is the ship that is actually really worth the cash at this point, at least at this early testing stage. And I have maybe a dozen games in each one of these ships, and the Ochakov is actually a fun ship. It has a very, very high skill floor and a correspondingly high skill ceiling because of its fragility. The Pyotr Bagration is actually it's actually an easier ship to use, but it has its own quirks, that's for sure. Again, Soviet permacamo, which comes in the package. Again, standard bonuses for a tier 8 cruiser, -3+4, -10% post-battle service, and plus 50% XP per battle. It's pretty standard tier 8 cruiser. Camouflage. Let's look at the captain build here before we get into it. Now, that'll give you a little bit more information as to why we build her this way. We build priority target. We build adrenaline rush. We build expert marksman. We build demolition expert. We build superintendent. There's a reason why, and you can see it on the bottom. And we build concealment expert, as we do on all of our ships. If we look at her modules, she comes equipped with either a choice of defensive fire AA or hydroacoustic search. This hydroacoustic search is listed as 3 km, 4 km for torpedoes and ships respectively. That will be changed in patch 0.9.5 to 3.5k and 5k, the same as the Ochakov. Apparently it's a glitch or a bug in it as it is sets now. But the other thing that the Pyotr comes with, she comes standard with a heal. She comes standard with a 28-second heal, which heals approximately 252 hit points per second. And that will come with a heal flag engaged. So 252 hit points for 28 seconds is about 7,000 points of damage, assuming you can restore all of the hit points lost, which is never true. But you have 4 of these, so you have a potential additional 28,000 points on your health pool. Now, speaking of health pool, she comes with 42,000 hit points, 16% torpedo damage reduction. Not too bad. This is actually very reasonable for a tier 8 cruiser. It's right on the same lines as her brother, the Kuchazov, or the comparable Mines. Actually, the Mines is not really comparable. It's a different ship, but similar type of cruiser, a light cruiser. What makes her a light cruiser is her armor layout, which, once again, is nothing to write home about. 25mm fore and aft end plating, 25mm casemate armor, 27mm deck, and a big, fat, thick 152mm Citadel plate. And this one the Pyotr comes with a 40mm fore-end armor belt, otherwise termed as the icebreaker bow. It technically is not an icebreaker bow, but that gets into naval architecture, and it's a different issue in itself. Needless to say, the Bagration is actually a much tougher nut to crack than the Ochakov or the Kuchazov. That 40mm plate down low makes things ricochet much more frequently than you would think. It does have a solid 180mm Citadel plate on the Citadel. The Citadel armor bulkhead is 40mm, but you have that 152mm plate on the outside as well. This little 40mm torpedo bulkhead is a little bit of a weak spot, but it's pretty tough. I've not been punched through the bow here and hit through this. So can you get, Citadel through that tiny little plating? Probably you can, but in practice, it's probably not going to happen too often. Interesting enough is this aft end armor plating of 100mm around the steering gear and engines. It's actually kind of interesting to see shells coming, down plunging as you're running away and kiting away and pinging off this. It's actually quite amusing to see. So the Pyotr is actually a relatively tough light cruiser, but armor is where her light cruiser status stops. If we click on artillery, this girl is armed with 3x3, so 3 triple 180mm rifles with an 11-second reload time and an 18.5 kilometer range. This thing's range, combined with how effective these shells are in terms of ballistics, makes her a wonderful kiting cruiser. With expert marksman, her 180-degree turn time leaves something to be desired at 26.9 seconds. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of Sovietsky Soyuz, Kremlin territory. So if you're a battleship player, this will be very comfortable to you. Dispersion at 149 meters is actually quite good at range. Her HE shells are somewhat anemic, only doing 2500 alpha, but they have a 16% fire chance. And again, that is with Demo Expert. That's 13%. I believe it's 13%. It's 14% without Demo Expert. And I believe it's 13% without, yes, it's 13% without the flag. So she has a 13% base fire chance, 16% with all buffs, 30 millimeters of HE penetration values. You can buff this with IFHE and get some significant improvement on that, but really you don't necessarily need to. The only thing you're going to be changing is, can you pen 32 millimeter decks? And do you really want to trade your fire chance for that? That's entirely up to you. Her AP shells, oddly enough, do the exact same damage as the tier 5 Mikoyan. So her AP shells are rather anemic for tier 8, to be perfectly honest. I found that her AP DPM at tier 8 is really somewhat lacking. When you compare her to the Mines, for example, the Mines is 150 millimeter guns, but her AP shells do 3,900 alpha, and she fires 12 of them in a broadside. Compared to the Bagration is 9 shells in a broadside for only about 45-50 per shell. So her armor penetration, her AP shell DPM is a little bit lacking. However, that is not to say that this ship does not punish broadsides significantly well. That 930 millimeter, 920 millimeter AP and HE shell velocity is great for reaching out and touching someone across the void. So she's actually very, very good at kiting away as a kiting cruiser. She does have 2 quintuple torpedo tubes. Again, they hit for 14,400 points damage with an 8-kilometer range. They're pretty slow, again, at 55 knots. These are basically self-defense torpedoes for when somebody is chasing you and you're kiting away, or you can use them as an ambush. But these are not spectacular torpedoes by any manner of means. AA defense, again, this is tier 8. AA doesn't work at tier 8. Maneuverability, she's relatively quick, 36.2 knots. She has a big 890 meter turning circle, and she has an 8.4 second rudder shift, again, with the 20-second buff from Steering Gears Mod 1. And concealment-wise, with a captain to full build, she gets down to 11 kilometers, which is actually quite good for a ship of this size. Module-wise, again, I showed you, she can take Hydro. She has a heal. Upgrade-wise, we're going to take Main Armaments Mod 1. Steering, or Engine Room Protection, used to be Steering Gears. Aiming Systems Mod 1 for better dispersion. I prefer Steering Gears Mod 1 here for rudder shift time. You could play her as an island camper. I wouldn't recommend bow tanking with her if you can avoid it, but you could use Prop Mod 1 if you so desire. And of course, Concealment System Mod 1 rounds out your modules. Now, how does Pyotr handle compared to her sister ships? Let's take a look and see how she performs in game. And so, gameplay-wise, the Pyotr Bagration is very much like any other Soviet light cruiser. She is going to be played at range. You're going to be very similar to a Donskoy in this effect. As you can see here, the Nagato shows up, spotted. We throw some shells out as we are already making our turn, so it really fouls up their ability to aim at us. And shells downrange. Of course, the first salvo misses, misjudging his speed and forgetting the fact that, yes, the Nagato is not as slow as a Colorado. We adjust our aim. And again, we are always wiggling, always kiting away, trying to avoid the obvious return fire. Here comes 16-inch shells from the Nagato, and because we have been wiggling ourselves the entire time, minimal damage by those shells. There's our first fire. This is something you can expect regularly with the Pyotr. Set a fire, move on to the next ship. Set a fire on that ship. And of course, we're looking and seeing that fire on the Nagato is still ticking away. Double fire on the North Carolina. We're going to let him rep. Our second salvo is already in the air. We're going to try and burn him down again. Now, special shout out has to go to this Kiev, who was an utter pain in the ass the entire match. This guy was a complete and total pest the entire match. And I wasted more salvos on him than I probably ever should have. Again, it's a Kiev. It's designed to do that. But where the Pyotr really, really shines is punishing battleships. You will see, even though we do get a fair number of shatters, and again, this is a top tier game, so the stakes on this are a little bit different. But even though we get a fair number of shatters from this HE, in fact, there's 5 shatters right there, we still do set a fair number of fires, and we do a fair amount of damage in this case. But this is actually a very, very textbook kiting cruiser demonstration. There's our first fire. We know his damage control is still on cooldown. He's not going to have it probably for another 20 seconds or so. So it's worth trying to get a few more shells on target and a few more fires. Damage over time, or dot damage in this case, is going to be your bread and butter. A thing to remember, however, is the fact that you are fragile. You are very, very fragile. You need to be kiting and moving at all times. The problem with the Pyotr, and this is something I didn't mention in the port view, and you can only really see here, is the second turret, the B turret angles, are actually extremely poor in a kiting situation. I've actually had a number of times where the only turrets, only the A and the X turret, or the first and third turrets, are the ones that are able to fire. The B turret is actually blocked by the superstructure, in this case the conning tower. And in there you can see a number of shatters, a number of pens. We're doing okay damage. We're a top tier cruiser. We should be doing nothing but setting fires. The fire chance was, it was okay in this game, but it wasn't spectacular. You can see where the improved rudder comes in handy in this case. There's another fire. That's going to be our 5th fire of the game, and we're going to burn that North Carolina down. Note that the rear turret actually has relatively good aiming angles for a ship like this, at least going forward. Pushing in, you can get all 3 turrets on target at about 25 to 30 degrees, which is actually pretty darn good. Probably about 35 degrees. Which is actually really, really quite good. It does suffer kiting away, like I said. That B turret really suffers when you are kiting away. But again, more Russian cruiser things, setting more fires. As you can see, we are ineffective in terms of shooting down aircraft. 3 ships and all with overlapping auras, and just barely the CV still manages to strike. So, and that's a tier 6 CV. So GG's. Anti-aircraft guns are working as intended. With any Russian heavy cruiser, the Pyotr Bagration included, your entire goal is to be as annoying and difficult to hit as possible. If you have played through the Shores, you have played through the Chapayev, you've played through the Donskoy, if you have played any of those ships, you will appreciate exactly what the Pyotr's playstyle is. And in this case here, we load the AP. Rear turrets actually clip the rock, so we really only get the front out, and I overled a little bit. But you can see the AP against broadside cruisers does a fair bit of damage. We're going to see AP against an angled target in this case, and it's significantly less impactful. And also that, once again, dispersion characteristics of the Russian ships as they get further away, their dispersion increases. Switching back to the HE, we set another fire. That's generally the way to go here. We're going to cut to later in the battle here. Right about this point where we're pushing forward, we're pushing around into the B cap. Is that B cap? C cap? Can't really see on my screen. But we have a pair of Chapayevs here, and you're going to see actually how much damage 152 millimeter shells can really do to the peanut butter and jelly. We start angling away. We're trying to go after that Chapayev, and you can see some unfortunate dispersion. This is where you suffer from having only 9 barrels as opposed to the 12 on the Donskoy. I would like to think that Donskoy would actually be getting 4 shells on target and on a salvo like that. 180 millimeter, we shatter on the guns of the Chapayev. And right there you can see my turrets are out of sync. My A and X turret are firing. My B turret is loading faster, and that's because I was kiting at an angle at which that B turret could not actually fire over the superstructure, couldn't fire over the shoulder. Some good dispersion at 12K. We get 6 shells on target. We've set a couple of fires. We are not the first ship in line. This is exactly correct. You don't want to be the front ship. You don't want to be taking fire. We expose a little bit of broadside to this Chappie, but we start turning away. That's IFHE 152, and it hurts. AP coming in from that Chappie, and that also hurts. And it's worth noting that AP shells from something like a Bayern with 15-inch guns will make your life miserable. We get that salvo out on the Chappie. We get him to die. AP bounces at that angle while we're looking at this Kiev. And we're looking at this schooner. Is that a schooner? I think that's the schooner. It's hard to see on this screen, but as we're looking at that schooner, these shells, like I said, these shells have some very odd ballistics characteristics. They don't feel like other Russian shells that I have played with, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but my guess is they lose speed fairly quickly, and that's why they feel as strange as they do. But you can see, even angled into that Bayern, we take a hell of a beating from his AP. At steep angles, you can bounce those shells, but given any kind of flat broadside, those shells are going to hurt a lot. So play with your throttle, play with your steering. You do not want those to hit you. You want to avoid them hitting you wherever possible. More fires, more HE spam. That is kind of the bread and butter of a Russian cruiser, both light or heavy. Moskva can be played pretty much the same way. And again, the CV comes at us and for some reason doesn't strike me, but goes after, attempts to strike me and can't. Bismarck AA is, I guess, combined with mine. 2 tier 8 AAs can finally do something. You can see where the heal comes in handy. The heal makes this ship actually have quite a bit of staying power, which is nice to see, because you see a lot of Russian ships and a lot of cruisers at tier 8 as a whole that don't have a lot of staying power, mainly because their health pool is very limited. You do start with that wickedly large health pool, and that wickedly large health pool is also supplanted by those healing charges. In this case, the Bismarck is YOLOing. I don't know why our Bismarck decides he doesn't want to live anymore, but he's decided he doesn't want to live anymore. He's going to secondary push a pair of Bayerns. Not that he doesn't do a fair bit of damage, but it's a Bismarck player. To expect him to not try to kill himself is, I guess, a little more that one can ask for. Another fire onto that Bayern, and all we're doing at this point is cycling damage controls, waiting for them to put out a fire, set another fire. And in this case, you know, I don't have any other targets in range. I have a DD in range. I have a battleship in range. I'm going to go after the 2 targets that I have. The Bismarck dies to the Bayern, leaves him on a fraction of health. That is something we can take care of. This is a ripple-firing Bayern, which is funny in its own right. Can't seem to hit me, which is fine with me because those shells hurt. We land another salvo, and put him back in port. And now we have to avoid the CV. We can play kitey with the CV and the DD, which is hanging out near the cap. We do have a Shores across the map who is going to engage both the Bayern and the CV. And at this point, we're not really worried about any kind of loss or anything else happening. So not a whole lot else is going to go on in this match. But would I recommend this ship? Out of any of these 3 ships in this Admiral pack, I would say the Pyotr Bagration is probably the best ship in the package. It has the lowest skill floor. It will be the easiest for most people to play. It will give you reasonable and reliable damage. This is absolutely a ship that pretty much anybody can pick up and play. It's not going to be super easy, but it's also not incredibly hard. The Ochakov is a much, much, much harder ship to play. It is going to take a lot more work to make the Ochakov work because its fragility and its consumable suite, it is going to have more utility, but it's going to be much, much more difficult to play. So would I recommend this? I would recommend the Pyotr Bagration, absolutely. This ship is quite a bit of fun. It has quite a bit of effective firepower, and I think you'll be able to probably make it work in most cases. Would I recommend the pack overall? Well, that depends. If you have the cash sitting around and you want to spend it, if you are determined that you want to get at least probably the Tier 8 Soviet heavy cruiser Tallinn, you do get a significant number of tokens by playing and winning in these ships. If you're a ship collector, you can just buy the ships themselves. If you're always in need of credits and doubloons, like a lot of people are, you do get a fair number of extras included in there. When it breaks down to it, you're spending about $2 for port slots and some perma camos. How much are you going to play these ships? Depends on the type of player that you are, whether you like Russian cruisers or not. But overall, I would say this is not a terrible buy. Would I say it's a must buy? Absolutely not. If you wanted to buy one ship or you wanted to purchase one ship out of this package, I would say the Bagration is the one to purchase unless you are a DD or light cruiser player, in which case I would say go play the Ochakov. Again, we do play all of these games on the Twitch channel, Dr. Drunk, twitch.tv/Dr. Drunk, aka. So give those a check out, and there'll be a lot more Soviet balance coming from that in the next few weeks. Until then, guys, Dr. Drunk, aka from the Drunk Tank, signing off.